Hey y'all, what is going on? What is going on? It's your girl, Melba Pearson, Melba for Miami, Melba for Justice, also known as the Resident Legal Diva, and it's time for another Mondays with Melba. I hope everyone's doing well, had a great weekend, and the week is off to a great start. So much to dive into today. The iPad is back, so you already know I'm coming with some knowledge, okay? So first off, this edition is all about the Florida primaries. Today is August 22nd. Tomorrow is primary day in Florida, August 23rd. The only way you can vote tomorrow is in person at your assigned polling stations. I'll be touching on some key things to keep in mind as you go out to go vote. Hopefully, folks have either turned in their ballots by mail already or taken advantage of the 2 weeks of early voting that we've had. But before I really dive in, I want to start off by recognizing the life and the legacy of Al Crespo, who passed away at the age of 80 years old last week from COVID complications. He was a very interesting guy with a really storied background, one that movies are made of, basically. But he had dedicated the last close to 2 decades of his life to transparency and good government and really calling out corruption in the city of Miami where he saw it. He was incredibly supportive of my campaign for state attorney, even though we never actually met because, of course, campaign happened during the pandemic. So there you have it. But he was really, if you ever got a chance to read the Crespogram, which was, him basically having this blog railing against corruption, calling out problems, showing where the loyalties of different elected officials lie. I think that was just incredibly deep, incredibly helpful as a resident, as a voter. So, it's really sad to see his journey end at this time. And thank you, Al, for all that you've done for this community, for raising awareness, and for really impressing upon us the importance of democracy and being engaged. One thing that I think would really encapsulate everything that he's about is the last line of his obituary, which is as follows. He says that in lieu of flowers, Crespo requested everyone vote at every opportunity. Remember, we live in a democracy. Evil and corruption exist not only in Miami, but throughout the nation, and the votes of caring citizens is democracy's best protection. So rest in peace, Al Crespo. And in honor of his legacy, let's take those words to heart, right? Because hopefully y'all have voted already for everybody that's in Florida. But if you didn't, it's okay. Tomorrow is in-person voting. And there are so many things that are on the ballot in direct and in indirect ways that are really important to keep in mind as you make your decisions as to who you're going to vote for moving forward. First off, want to talk about the primary for Florida governor. So we have an incumbent, as most folks know. Governor has been making the rounds all around the country, but be that as it may, we have two candidates for governor on the Democratic side. And so the primary is going to decide who will represent the Democratic Party against the incumbent come this November. We've got two choices on the ballot, Charlie Crist, Nikki Fried. Both have pluses, both have minuses, so I leave it to folks to make their own decision. But I just want to remind everybody about the importance of the governor's race because of the fact that we saw in the last 2 weeks, State Attorney Andrew Warren, who was the elected state attorney for Hillsborough County, Florida. Now, Hillsborough County, for those who are outside of Florida, is the basically metro Tampa area. He was elected in 2016 on a pretty progressive platform. He was reelected in 2020 after coming through with those promises that he had made and started to build on that. And the governor decided to remove him from office. Why, you may ask? Well, because he signed on to a letter with 100 other elected prosecutors from around the country that said that they were not going to use their limited resources to pursue cases of people either seeking an abortion or of abortion providers providing abortions. They just didn't see it as a huge payoff in terms of public safety. And again, you've got to be responsive to the needs of your community. Tampa, the Tampa area, is a very heavily blue area. Floridians in general support abortion at rates of close to 60%. And also, Florida's Constitution has a privacy law that basically enshrines the right to be able to make health decisions, including abortion. So this is something that clearly Floridians support. The governor does not, and has been using this to be part of his culture wars, right? Like he's pushing back and owning those limbs, right? When at the end of the day, it's only harming the people of, of the entire state, of the Hillsborough County, where folks voted for Andrew Warren, right? Like they wanted him, they wanted his policies, they were okay with that. So whatever happened to being the party of small government and government closest to the people, like all of a sudden that idea goes out the window when you have a political dispute and you don't agree with what a state attorney is doing. So the governor does have the power to remove a state attorney from office. If you check out my socials, I've posted a number of op-eds I've written on this topic, including for the Miami Herald and the Miami Times, where the governor does have the ability, but it should be something used sparingly. We're talking about misfeasance, malfeasance, habitual drunkenness, neglect of duty. And the governor was using the statements by State Attorney Warren of saying he's not going to go after people for seeking abortions or for providing abortions as a neglect of duty. Meanwhile, there's not been one, not nary a one, arrest in the state of Florida of someone who was either providing an abortion or was seeking abortion care. So again, this is hypothetical, right? It's not like a case came in front of him and he said, well, I'm making this policy and I'm not going to pursue this case. Nothing's happened yet. There's still 5 lawsuits pending with regards to abortion access in Florida and how this can run afoul of the 15-week abortion ban that passed last session would run afoul of the Florida Constitution because of its privacy protections. So again, this is a far from settled issue, and it falls under the category of political speech because he's just basically talking about, hey, this is how I feel about the topic of a person's right to choose. And here's what I'm going to use my budget for, right? I'm going to prioritize murders and sexual assaults and those types of things, carjackings, as opposed to a person's private decision with regards to their health and their family planning. So it's really disturbing to see a whole communities, like a whole cities, vote be just completely disregarded. So the question is, what kind of Florida do we want to see? Do we want to see something along the lines of basically an authoritarian type situation, right? Where it's the government telling us this is what we do, or should it be about the people selecting their government and their people actually having a voice and the ability to change things and to change direction? So that's part of what's on the ballot for the primary this year. Also, folks may have seen the stories of 20 arrests were made of people with felony convictions for murder and sexual assault because they voted in the 2019-2020 elections, right? So arrests were made in 3 cities around Florida. Ironically, one of those cities was Tampa, where the governor removed the state attorney and appointed someone else to take his place, right? So kind of interesting that now we're going to see prosecutions coming out of that office for quote unquote voter fraud. But here's what I really think happened, which is what's very perturbing. And a lot of the accounts from the people that were arrested seem to be consistent with that. There was a lot of messaging once Amendment 4 passed in 2018. Now, Amendment 4 was the amendment that gave voting rights back to people who had felony convictions as long as they finished their sentence and completed all the terms of their sentence and basically go and register and do everything they need to do. Now, so everybody was like, oh, Amendment 4, great. Oh my gosh, returning citizens can vote, right? Well, there was one very important part that said if you were convicted of homicide or sexual assault, you would not be able to register to vote. You still had to go through the old clemency process where you have to ask the governor for permission to get your rights restored, right? So that was the letter of the law, right? But I think again, it got lost in the messaging. So many people got incorrect information. And then you go as a returning citizen with this background of homicide or sexual assault that makes you not eligible to register to vote, but you went and registered and the state took your application anyway and sent you a voter registration card. So kind of whose fault is that, right? Because the reality is the prosecutor is going to have to prove that these folks knew that they were not eligible to register to vote, did it anyway, and then went ahead and voted despite knowing they were not eligible to do so. Well, that kind of goes out the window if the folks thought they were legit eligible to go ahead and vote. So a lot of folks were saying, and were quoted as saying in a number of outlets, including the Miami Herald, like, listen, we're confused because we went and registered. We would have thought that the state would have told us, no, you can't, you're not eligible because of your background. And then we wouldn't have voted. We didn't know that we weren't eligible. And the reality is, too, the burden does lie with the supervisor of elections to go through the voter rolls every so often, multiple times a year, and make sure that the people that are registered to vote are actually eligible to vote, right? Because that is the power of the state of Florida. You have the access to all the different databases. You can look it up right quick, and then you just bounce somebody off the rolls and send them a letter and saying, listen, you're no longer eligible to vote because of XYZ ABC, or we found a problem in your registration. That's all that needs to happen. So all of this like pomp and circumstance and all of this, these cases are going to be a big nothing burger because there is no way that a prosecutor is really going to be able to move forward with this case effectively. Because how do you prove that, that these people did so knowingly? They legit didn't. And you have their statements out there saying, listen, we didn't know that we weren't eligible to vote. Meanwhile, and those 20 arrests that the governor was talking about, didn't mention the 3 folks that got arrested in the Villages which is Central Florida, for casting multiple ballots. Now that's legit fraud, right? Because you're casting your ballot, let's say in Miami on during early voting, and then you vote again in Orlando on Wednesday during early voting. Well, you voted already. You only get one shot at it. You don't get to vote again. Everybody knows that. So that's a very clear-cut instance of voter fraud, as opposed to somebody who got bad information, registered, and the state fell down on the job and didn't even tell them that, hey, you're not eligible, you shouldn't go vote. So again, a lot of political theater, and all of this is, again, back on the ballot when it comes to looking at our primary and our midterm elections come November. What kind of Florida do we want to see? Because this is going to be problematic, where a whole bunch of taxpayer dollars are going to be flushed down the toilet trying to pursue these cases when the state can't really move forward in good faith. Super, super problematic. And quick shout out to the Leap for Ladies, which is an amazing organization that works with women who are coming out of prison. I'm rocking their shirt, which says Unjudge. And so if you get a chance, definitely check out the work they're doing and support as well. Our forever Vice President, Kamala Harris, actually visited them a couple weeks ago, which is pretty dope. So anyway, going back to returning citizens who finally have gotten the right to vote back, do you want to intimidate more folks? Because now other folks are sitting there looking at this thinking, okay, I registered, but was my registration good? Am I eligible to vote? Because how do you go to a polling place thinking you're eligible? You've got your voter registration card, you vote, and now you're being prosecuted for doing something you thought you legally had the right and ability to do. Super problematic. So definitely something else for folks to keep in mind on the ballot. Also, the governor suffered a whole bunch of losses around his quote unquote Stop Woke Act. That, again, another piece of legislation that was passed this last legislative session, where it attacked the ability for folks to talk about race related issues, whether it be in the workplace, at school, aspects like that. Again, trying to roll back the clock and not talk about issues that impact all Floridians, right? So a court came back and said, because a whole bunch of lawsuits obviously got filed as a result of this, the Stop Woke Act, because it infringes on free speech. You should have the freedom to be able to talk about whatever issues that come to the forefront that impact your students, that impact your staff, your employees. And so a court basically said, you know what? This is an impermissible restriction on free speech for businesses. So this part of the law is being struck down. Now, we know the governor's going to appeal, but again, what kind of Florida do we want to live in? What kind of country do we want to live in, where we can't even talk about accurate history and the impact it has on different communities and on different populations? Like, that's kind of just a no-brainer to me. We should kind of know what's going on and make our decisions accordingly, but you can't make good decisions if you don't have the right information. So again, all of this is on the ballot because you think about the different legislators who voted for these bills, right? Who just rolled over and said, okay, yeah, fine, this is all a good idea, when they don't look at or they don't care about the ramifications that it has on the communities that they've been elected to represent. So let me give you an example. Very hotly contested race, and I make no bones about who I'm supporting. There's a race right now for a Florida House district, which is 109, and that's Ashley Gant, who is running against incumbent James Bush. Now, James Bush has voted in favor of parental consent for abortion. Let me tell you how that pans out in real life. Many of you may have seen the story by now of a 15-year-old girl that wanted to get an abortion. She was a ward of the state, meaning she didn't have a family, right? She didn't have parents or anything like that. The father of the child, it does not want any part of, raising the child, any part of a life together. She doesn't have a job. She barely is in school, right? So she has, literally, to be blunt, she doesn't have a pot to piss in or a window to throw it out of, right? Like, that's just raw and uncut. That's really what's going on with her, right? So because of this bill that requires parental consent to get an abortion, since she's a ward of the state, she had to go to the court to ask for permission to have this abortion. So she goes to court, she brings the legal guardian with her, her guardian ad litem, and she basically is like, listen, I need to get this abortion. I cannot take care of this child. The court turned around to her and said, yeah, you're not mature enough to make that decision, but you're mature enough to have a child. So bye, have fun. And of course, this all was happening around 10, 12 weeks. And now, with abortion not being legal in Florida after 15 weeks and her being a ward of the state, can she even really travel, right? That does not give her enough time to be able to go someplace else, go to another state or whatever the case may be, and end up getting an abortion so that she doesn't have to now live in poverty and have no options, right? But this is a direct result of the parental consent bill passing. This was the type of thing that advocates and folks in the community had been speaking out against and saying, not everybody has a Norman Rockwell, Leave It to Beaver type of family where they have a good relationship with their parents and they can talk about these issues. They may not have a family. They may not have parents. If they do, the parents may be abusing them. You don't know what's going on. So you can't make these blanket type of laws when it's going to impact so many people in a horrible way. That's one of the bad votes that he made. Another bad vote was that he voted in favor of the 15-week abortion ban. Again, knowing that folks can't make these types of decisions in a timely manner, meaning that more folks will end up staying in poverty or staying in abusive situations because now they don't have the ability to get out. So, being against choice is very problematic. Now, at the end of the day, Everybody has the right to make whatever decisions they want in their own house. Period. End of story, right? Just because you may be pro-choice does not mean you're going to go have an abortion. It just means you're cool with somebody else making the decision of what's best for them while you make the best decision for you, which is what this world should be about, right? Like, you make the best decisions you have for your situation without being forced into it because of politics or whatever the case may be. So all of these things are on the ballot. That's why you have to look real deep before you leap when it comes to voting for your legislators, for judges, for your state senators, for your Congress people. Are they really going to uphold the values of what you sent them up to Tallahassee or to DC to do? And if they're not doing it, they need to be held accountable. And none of this foolishness of, well, this seat belongs to me because I've been in it for 20 years. Yeah, okay, but if you're no longer delivering for the community, then it's time for you to move on and do something else. And we have to, as voters, have to hold people accountable. So that's the story behind all that. And that is why this primary is so incredibly important. In terms of turnout, it's a little sad. In Miami-Dade County, as the current numbers, you're looking at about 12% of eligible voters have turned out for early voting and vote by mail ballots. Statewide, it's looking around 15%. That's low, y'all. That's really, really low. And I never like low voter turnout, period, because it just means a small section of the population is making the decisions for everybody. I need everybody to go out and vote because you are impacted by every single thing that's on the ballot, period. Period, end of story. So you need to go out and vote. Right now, Democrats are in the lead with regards to voting. However, I kind of expect that to tighten a little bit because Republicans tend to turn out more in person on the day of, on election day. We have seen a shift of more Republicans voting by mail, but still they like to traditionally go in on election day. However, the other thing to keep in mind is that there may not be a ton of races for the Republicans to get excited about. Now, of course, there's the school board races, which the governor, even though it's nonpartisan, the governor has gone in and endorsed a whole bunch of people who obviously are against, real choice, against, learning about race in a healthy way, learning about sexual education in a healthy way. They're against all of that. They're just like the Moms for Liberty people, which, they're not really for liberty. They're like not at all. But there's not a lot in terms of Republican candidates, especially, listen, if your dude's the incumbent, if your person's the incumbent, there's nothing for you to go out to vote for really until November, other than ballot initiatives, judges, that sort of thing. So that's the only variable as to whether or not the turnout is going to end up being even Democrat, Republican, or if one party is going to exceed the other. But just seeing the low turnout is very disheartening for me. And I need y'all just to get it together and go out and vote. Please, right? End of story. Because you can't complain about things aren't getting better or why this or why that if you haven't even tried to be part of the solution. So there's that. Okay, things to keep in mind when you go vote tomorrow. So tomorrow is election day. Polls are open from like 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. You have to vote at your designated precinct. Make sure to check online before you go, just to make sure that your precinct hasn't changed because of redistricting, right? So, every 10 years we go through the redistricting process. As a result of that, your border lines may have changed. So just double check so you don't go to the wrong polling place. And then now you're stuck and you're waiting and now you got to go someplace else. And it's a whole mission, especially if you're trying to do it on like your lunch break or something along those lines. So definitely check in advance. Check your sample ballot so that, again, you know who and what you are voting for before you get into the ballot box. Remember that once you get in line, if you are in line before 7 p.m., you shall not be moved. If you are in line at the polling place before 7 p.m., they have to let you vote. Even if the line goes till 8 p.m., it doesn't matter. They have to stay there until every last person has voted, as long as you got in the door before 7 p.m. So don't let anybody tell you otherwise. If you got there at the right time, you are supposed to be allowed to vote. So there's that. Also, if there's an issue, bring your photo ID. But if there's some issue with regards to can't find your registration, whatever the case may be, demand a provisional ballot. A provisional ballot basically means it's a temporary ballot. So you're allowed to vote that day. You then have usually about 7 days after election day to cure any problems. So if it was an ID issue, if it was a signature issue, whatever, you would then have to go to the supervisor of elections office in your county and fix whatever the issue is, but you have time to do it. If you don't fix it, then that provisional ballot doesn't count. It gets thrown out. So it's just a way to make sure that you are able to vote and that your vote gets counted, assuming that the issue can be resolved. Because once you walk away, you don't get a second shot. Nobody sends you a ballot later on down the line. Oops, sorry, we made a mistake. You can go ahead and vote now. No, it's too late. So make sure to get that provisional ballot. If you witness issues while you're online, while you're voting, let's say people aren't being given access to interpreters to be able to help them with the ballot, or if there's a person with a disability who needs assistance voting, they're not getting the assistance they need, whatever the case may be, here's a number for you to call: 1-866 Our Vote, OURVOTE, 1-866 Our Vote. This is the election protection hotline, which is nonpartisan. Whatever the issue is, you report it, and then they can take a look at if there's patterns, if they need to send someone over there, whatever the case may be, they can help address any issues that come up. I'm dropping that in the chat, in the comments, so folks can have that information handy to be able to report any issues that may come up on primary day, election day. Fingers crossed, nothing, but things happen. Again, human beings, people make mistakes. People may not have the accurate information. So just make sure to report any issues that come up. So I think that's a lot for today. So just reminding everyone to make sure to get out and vote. Make sure to have that number in case there's any problems. Take a look at all of my socials. I have posted the candidates that I'm supporting. Of course, these are not an exhaustive list. I don't weigh into every single race and every single election happening in the state, right? Like I'm just kind of picking a few key ones. But if you have somebody that you're like, I don't know what's happening between these two people, do you have any input on either of these candidates? Feel free to shoot me a message, DM me, email me, whatever the case may be. I'm happy to weigh in with whatever information I have. All right, y'all. So remember to vote and tune in next Monday, where we're going to have Cheryl Francis, who is an amazing financial guru. So we're going to do a little self-help, a little, financial growth stuff next week. So tune in for that. And I appreciate y'all. Take good care. Bye.